Eclipse, how to set up and play. I'm going to be covering most rules from the base game, as well as the Rise of the Ancients expansion, and some of the extras from Ship Pack 1. So to set up the game, we'll start with the technology board. We'll put the round marker out at round 1. The game is played over 9 rounds. You'll have your trader card. The last player that holds this at the end of the game will lose 2 victory points. We're going to put all the reputation chips or victory point chips, which range from 1 to 4, in the small black bag. And we'll put all technology tiles in the large white bag. Just to show you some of the different types, there's 3 different categories. This first category is the star. It means military technology. This grid is grid technology. This is nanotechnology, and this is rare technology. These first 3 symbols correspond to rows on the technology board. Also, there's a little icon on the right that tells you what the technology is used for. So this technology allows you to build things during the build phase, specifically the Starbase here. This technology is a ship part technology, so you'll need this to actually use certain ship parts during the upgrade phase. This is a one-time use, so it's an immediate benefit, and then you'll see some just don't have anything. If you were playing with 7 or more players, there's extra technology tiles you can add to the bag, multiples of the same type. But for all normal games, 2 to 6 players, you'll just add all of the technology tiles randomly to the bag, and then you're going to draw based on the number of players. So this is the starting draw. So for 2 players, you draw 12, 3 players 14, 4 players 16, 5 players 18, and 6 players 20. I'm setting this up for a 4-player game, so I'm going to draw 16 tiles randomly from the bag, which I've already done here. Now it's important to remember, if you do draw rare technology with these circles on the left, they do not count towards your draw number, and that works actually each round also as you're replenishing the technology board. So I randomly drew these 16. They correspond to the row, and you'll just lay these out on the technology board. There's also a variant, which I'm not playing with, called predictable technology. So you could also additionally draw the technology for the next round. We'll get to the cleanup phase, but you'll see at the end of each round, based on the number of players, you'll draw additional technology. So for a 4-player game, every round I would draw 7 new technology to fill the technology board. If you're playing with the variant, you could draw those now and have those available so players know what's coming up in the next draw. Next, you'll just create a supply on the technology board. So you're going to have the ancient ships. You're going to shuffle these up. These are the discovery tiles, and keep them face down, so you just show the 2-point victory marker. You're going to have orbitals, which can be built during the game, as well as monoliths. You're going to have purple damage cubes. You're going to have all of your ship parts. You'll notice that these are a square tile versus the technology that have a cut edge. These are your basic technology. You'll notice they do not have that icon in the upper right, which means during the upgrade action, you can freely add these to your ships, whereas this means that you've got to have the corresponding technology to use those upgrade parts. And finally, I'm playing with developments. So we'll randomly draw number of developments equal to the number of players plus 1. So since I'm setting this up for a 4-player game, I randomly drew 5 development tiles, and I lay them out here. These can be gained through the research action in the game. You'll see that these 2 specific development tiles come with corresponding tokens. And we'll cover these all later. Next, all players will choose a color. The color really doesn't matter. And we'll randomly determine the turn order. We can use dice, so I rolled dice here to determine the turn order. and this turn order variant is in one of the expansions. So you'll just set the turn order, and then in reverse turn order, all players will get to pick their species and the corresponding player board. So I've replaced the token now with a token for the species that each of the players selected. The species in Eclipse start with asymmetrical setup and abilities. So let's take a look at the player pieces. So this is the first player. This is a human player. So there's several different human or Terran boards you can pick from in the game. Let's go through each of the pieces. First are the ships. Each player will get 8 interceptors, 4 cruisers, 2 dreadnoughts, and 4 starbases. You'll also take your resource markers and put them on the corresponding hashes. This will indicate how many starting resources you have in storage. And again, this will vary for each player. For example, this player, you can see they have different starting hashes for their starting resources. The 3 types of resources in the game: orange is money, pink is science, and brown are materials. Money is used to pay your upkeep at the end of the round. Science is used to get new technology and developments, and brown, or the materials, are used to actually build ships, orbitals, monoliths, and so forth. Next, you'll take your 33 population cubes and line them up on this track, just leaving this far right column exposed. And then you'll take 16 influence discs and fill them up here at the bottom all the way. And you're going to have 3 left over. These can be acquired during the game if you get certain technologies. Each player is also going to get a number of colony ships as indicated on their player board. 3 is the norm. So these are the 3 colony ships. You're also going to get ambassador tiles for each player. The ambassador tiles are not used in a 2 or a 3 player game, but I'm setting this up for 4 players. So every player will have those ambassador tiles. Each player will have an action card, and this gets flipped over each round when they pass. And then finally, each species or player board has a corresponding starting hex. You can see that the icon matches this, but more importantly, it gives you the starting hex number there, 227, and then you'll find the precise 227 starting hex. For each player's starting hex, you'll take 1 disc off of the track, mark it, and then you can actually fill in your starting population cubes. So you'll actually take these from the far right portion of your cube track here and place them on your starting hex. So here you can see I've taken 1 orange, 1 pink, 1 brown that correspond to the colors there. Now it's important to remember that each species may be a little bit different. The Hydran Progress species, you can see one of the technologies that they start with on their board is Advanced Lab. So that symbol means you're not allowed to place population cubes on those types of boxes unless you have the technology. And there's technologies for each of the different colored cubes. So Advanced Mining is brown, Advanced Economy is orange, and Advanced Labs is pink. So since this species starts with it, they took 2 cubes off of their pink row and 1 off of their money row. And that is their starting hex setup. They do not have that technology, so they couldn't put that cube. Finally, each player will put 1 interceptor on their starting hex, unless their species is a little bit different. But that's your starting hex setup: an influence disc, population cubes, and 1 interceptor. Finally, before we can get started, we've got to set up the hexes in the center. So the first thing you'll do is find the Galactic Center hex tile. It's number 001. This outline here always indicates that you put a discovery tile there, and then you'll select which GCDS, Galactic Center Defense System, you'll want to play the game with. This is the default one that comes in the base game. This one is an advanced GCDS, and this one is an ancient Dreadnought. So your group can just decide what you want to play with. I'll start with the default one. And you just put it on top of the discovery tile token, which can't be taken until this alien ship is destroyed. Normally you would not lay these out. I've just done it to kind of show how the rings work. So this inner ring is called Sector 1. The next ring around the center would be called Sector 2. And then the third ring would be Sector 3 tiles. You'll next place the starting player tiles based on the number of players in the game. So if this was a full 6-player game, you'd have 6 hexes in ring 2. Since we're not playing with a full player count, I'm using the expansion where we have ancient home worlds. Basically, it's some NPC tiles that fill the place of where a starting player hex would go. So in this example, this is configured for a 2-player setup. So you can see the 2-player hexes would go here, and the other starting player hexes would get filled in by ancient homeworlds. So you can use that module anytime you're playing with less than 6 players. So in this example, a 2-player setup, I've added these 2 starting hexes here and here. It's important to remember they always face away from the Galactic Center tile. So the shield is facing away. Up here, this tile's upside down, so it's facing away. And you do the same thing for the alien homeworlds. You face it away from the center tile. For each of the ancient homeworlds, you're going to put a discovery token and an ancient cruiser on each of the tiles. Now there is a variant. You can just actually shuffle these into your hex stack and just leave these spots blank to start the game. So now that I've put the ones shuffled back into their stack here, this is how the configuration, how it would look for a starting 2-player game. The last thing you're going to do before you're ready to start the game is to create your hex stacks. So you have all of your Sector 1 hexes, all of your Sector 2 hexes, and then you're actually going to draw Sector 3 hexes based on the number of players in the game. Before you actually draw your Sector 3 hexes, you're going to want to mix in any promos or special tiles that you're using. For example, I've already mixed in warp portals, ancient hives, nebulas, pulsars, supernovas, and 1 black hole. So those got all mixed into my main Sector 3 hex stack, and then I drew after that to form my Sector 3 hex stack tile. And you'll see it's based on the number of players. So in a 2-player game, you draw 5. 3-player game, you draw 10. In this 4-player game, I drew 14 Sector 3 hexes. 5-player game, 6-player game. Now that we've completed setup, we're ready to cover all the actions in the game. All right, let's cover all the actions in Eclipse. So first, there are 3 actions you can do anytime during your turn, and they're not going to require one of these action discs. The first one is to use your colony ships. You can use your colony ship and simply flip it over, and this allows you to place a cube out onto a hex as long as you already have an influence disc on that tile, and allows you to colonize it. So if you wanted to flip one of your things, you could take one of your cubes and place it on here. So maybe later in the game I got this technology, this advanced mining, and I could use one of my colony ships to put a cube there. The next anytime action is I can exchange or trade resources. So I could convert any 2 resources in my storage to one other. And that's a ability of the Terran or the human factions. You'll see every species has a slightly different conversion rate. Here it takes 3 of any to get 1 of another kind. The third action you can do anytime on your turn is to form a trade alliance. These are used in 4 or more player games. If two players are adjacent, meaning they can get to each other's hexes, because there's a wormhole there, and you've got ships or influence, then you can actually form a trade alliance. You'd give your ambassador token to that player along with a cube of your choice. So you take a cube off your board, put it on your token, and then as long as they have an open spot for it, you can see the outline there, they would get that, and then they would give you one of their ambassador tokens. So this is a way to increase your production, but at the same time you're going into a peaceful relationship with them. So you have to be adjacent, meaning you can get to each other's hexes. Your ships can't be pinned, and you can trade these ambassador tiles with a cube if you have an open slot. Basically this means now you cannot enter a hex of another player, either with one of your ships or trying to place an influence disc. If a player breaks the alliance by entering the other player's hex, that's when they take this -2 trader card. And if someone did it later in the game, the card would get passed to them. So it's whoever holds this card at the end of the game is going to lose 2 victory points. If a trade alliance is broken, the players have to return the ambassador tiles and place the cubes back on their population track, wherever they'd like. You can have multiple trade alliances with different players, as long as you have an available spot to place it on your board. Keep in mind though, these spots are used for both trade alliance tokens and reputation tiles, which are your victory points. So you're limited based on the outlines on your specific species board. Alright, so there are 6 main actions in Eclipse: explore, influence, research, upgrade, build, and move. You can take repeat actions. You only get 1 action on your turn. So you go in turn order and you get to choose one of the actions. So you may choose explore, resolve that, it comes back around to you. There's nothing that prohibits you from taking explore again. One thing to be mindful of is the more actions you take, you're increasing the amount of money you're going to have to outlay at the end of the round. So this first action is the explore action. You see on this player board it shows 1 hex, so this species is allowed to explore 1 hex. You have to explore from an adjacent tile, meaning one of the tiles that you have control over or your ships are on. So you have to have a wormhole, and then you have to have either ships on that tile or influence. So for example, this player has an influence disc and a ship, so they can explore to any one of these areas with a wormhole. They could not explore here because there's no wormhole connection. So they'll decide, I want to explore here. We know that's a sector 3 tile because it's in the 3rd ring, and they would draw that hex from the top of the stack. So they drew the top hex. Now they can decide to discard this immediately, discard it face up, but that ends their explore action. They'll choose to keep it, so they have to position it in such a way that the wormhole forms. If there are no ancients guarding the hex, the player can immediately influence the hex and control it by placing one of their influence discs. Here are some other examples of hexes that could have been drawn. If it has the outline, you put a discovery tile token, and since there's no ancients covering this one, if this was the hex they explored, they could influence it and immediately get this random discovery tile token. They'll look at it and decide if they want to take the power on the back, or if they choose, they'll decide to just keep it as 2 victory points. Here's an example of one. It has the outline, so you'd put a discovery tile token, but since it has ancient or alien symbols, either 1 or 2, this one has 2 skulls, you're going to put 2 ancient ships. So this one cannot be influenced until these ancient ships are destroyed in a later action. So you only get that discovery token when you're able to finally put your disc there. In this example, they put their disc. Keep in mind they can use their anytime actions to flip over 2 of their colony ships and now put an orange and a brown cube out here. The next action is the influence action. you'll see it allows you to move 2 of your influence discs. They can be moved either from or to hexes, or from or to your player board. You can move up to two discs. If it comes off of a hex, you have to return those population cubes. If they came from a white spot, they can be returned to any. So there are white spots here. So when you're colonizing, using your colony ships to put cubes here, it's like a wild spot. You can pull from any of your rows. When you're taking them off of the planet, because you're losing influence in the disk, you can return those to any row you see fit. So maybe this player wants to use the influence action because they're just running out of influence disks, so they decide to pull that off. Since they've lost influence in the sector, they've got to remove these. This one will go back to the orange track, this one will go to the brown track, and their influence disk immediately comes back to their track, just like that. If you're using the influence action to put a disk from your player board onto a hex, the normal rules apply. You have to be adjacent. So you have to be from a hex where there's a wormhole and you either have influence or ships. You could use the influence action now to put a disk there. The other benefit of the influence action is you'll see the icon down here. You get to unflip up to 2 of your colony ships in this example. So this player, if they took it, maybe they want to unflip that, which allows them to put more cubes out on the board. Next action is the research action. So this player, by taking the research action, can research 1 technology. Always pay attention to these icons because they are different on different player boards. When this player, the Hydra in Progress, takes the research action, they can research 2 technologies. But in this example, this player can research 1 technology. It's basically any technology or development. You remember I'm playing with the development module. Any technology or development that you can afford. Technology you pay with science. So you're going to pay from your storage based on where your pink marker is. There's 2 values on each technology tile. The one on the left is the base price in science, and the one on the right is the minimum price that you'll have to pay. The reason why there's a minimum price is because you can actually get discounts. So for example, if I was to place this one, and this is the next open spot on my player board, I would get a -1 discount off of the base price. So this could potentially go down to 1, but we'll see it can't because the minimum price I have to pay in science is 2. So even though I'm placing it on a discount spot, I didn't earn a discount. But with other technologies, you'll see, if I decided to buy this technology instead, and you can buy any technology that you can afford, if I purchase this one, it would cost 5, the base minus the 1 that I'm placing it on. It's also important that based on the row that you're taking the technology off of, you've got to put it on the corresponding row on your board. So if I'm taking something off the grid row, it has to go into the far left position on my player board. If you're purchasing a rare technology, you can put that on any of the rows on your player board and get the discounts. You'll see as you get more technologies in the game, you can also earn victory points at game end. Now the research action also allows you to purchase a development if you like. Developments actually come at different costs. You'll see the cost at the bottom, so they're not necessarily science. This one costs 5 money and 5 brown that come out of your storage, but you immediately get 12 science. And so you can see they have different benefits, but just like buying a technology, you've got to pay the cost and then you can get the benefit. And we'll cover these later. But keep in mind that these are limited. These do not get replenished like technologies get replenished. So once they're gone, they're gone. Next is the upgrade action. So in this example, I'm allowed to do 2 upgrades to my ships. Basically, upgrades means you're taking an existing ship part and adding it to your ship blueprints. So I can do any 2. Keep in mind, these are the basic ones. These require that I have the technology already present on my player board to actually take this ship part. Any technology upgrade that you put on a blueprint, it'll upgrade all current ships that you have on the board and all future builds. So if I upgrade my interceptor, the interceptor that's already out there will now immediately have the new power of whatever upgrade I put in. Any future interceptor I have will get the upgrade. You can freely discard ship parts to make room for others. You can put ones over ship parts. The only restriction is every ship has to have a drive. It has to have an engine of some sort that allows it to move. That goes for interceptors, cruisers, and dreadnoughts. A starbase is not allowed to have a drive because it's a stationary object that stays on a hex once built. Also keep in mind each species will have different configurations of the starting blueprints, but let's go over some of the core attributes. Holes, or this starburst icon, are basically additional hit or life points. All ships have a base of 1 hit point, and then this ship starts with an additional 1. So this ship has 2 life points. The next one is an energy source. That's this icon. So this ship has an energy source of 3. You'll see that some ship parts require energy. So this ship is producing 3 energy, but it has 2 ship parts that are consuming energy. 1 here, 1 here. So it has 1 additional spare energy. So if you came down here and you wanted to get, these, you've got to be mindful of how much extra energy you're putting on your ship. You're not allowed to place a ship part unless your ship has the energy to support it. There are weapon ship parts. The number of dice symbols indicates the number of dice that each ship will roll during combat. The number of bursts on the dice indicates the number of damage that a single hit will do. So for example, if you were to upgrade a ship, or let's say you had the plasma cannon technology, and that allowed you to upgrade plasma cannons on your ship. Let's ignore the power requirement for a second because you'll see I've already exceeded it. So in this case, all of my cruisers would roll 2 orange dice, and then for each dice that hit, they would do 2 damage. But we know I can't upgrade these because I don't have enough power. I only have 3 power, and just these 2 parts alone take 4 power. Next are computers. Computers add pips to each attack dice when you roll. And then shields actually subtract pips from opponents' dice when they get rolled. When we talk about combat, we'll go through all the different ways that works. The final main ship part is called a drive. So a drive will show the number of hexes that can be moved to or passed through during an action. Some drives also provide initiative. That's this chevron here. You'll see that this ship also has an additional initiative. These determine the order of fire during a combat round. One other thing I wanted to point out is on weapons, the difference between cannons and missiles. So missiles will actually have a little icon above it, and they get treated differently in combat. So again, the upgrade action would allow this player to do 2 upgrades, and as long as your ship has the power to support it and your ships have a drive, you can configure your ships any way you like. The next action is the build action, and this actually allows you to build ships and other structures. In this example, this player can build 2 structures or ships. You have to build on hexes where you have an influence disk. The number of wrenches indicates the number of builds you can do, and you pay materials. So that's your brown resource in storage. You can build orbitals or monoliths. These are orbitals and monoliths, and it's based on the build cost on your player board. So for this player, an orbital will cost 5 and a monolith will cost 10. It's important to remember that you have to have the technology first to build orbitals and monoliths before you can do it. The other structure that requires a technology to build is a starbase. You'll see the Terrans actually start with the technology to build starbases. The other types of ships, interceptors, cruisers, and dreadnoughts, do not require the technology, so you can freely build those if you can meet the build costs. It's important to remember that you're limited by the number of components you have. So exactly only 8 interceptors. So once you've built all 8 and they're on hexes, until they get destroyed and come back to you, you cannot build any more. But there is no limit to the number of ships that you can actually have on a hex. You're only limited to your number of components. If you're building an orbital, orbitals, you can only have 1 orbital per hex, and you can actually use your colony ship to place a science or a money cube on that orbital. It acts as an extra cube space on the hex. Now keep in mind, it stays on the hex. It can't be moved. So if another player comes in and takes control of that, that stays. So if you have your influence disk removed, remember, once you lose influence or control over a sector, all your population cubes have to come back. So the other player can now put one of their cubes on it. Monoliths also, you can only have 1 per hex, and it gives 3 victory points to whoever controls that hex at the end of the game. The final action we'll talk about is the move action. The number of arrows indicates how many move points you get. So I get 3 move points here. I can move 3 different ships, or I can move 1 ship 3 different types, or 3 different times. The distance that a ship can travel is based on their drive. So you can see this ship can move 1 hex. It can move an adjacent hex. As I get more advanced drives, I can move 2 hexes with a single ship activation. So ships move based on their drive capability, and they have to move either to or through adjacent hexes. So the wormhole has to be connected for them to actually move. So that would be a 1 ship activation, and they could move there because their interceptor, in this case, has a 1 hex capability when moving. Another concept with moving is pinning. So ships, each opposition ship will pin one of your ships. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I was using an activation, let's say I had 2 movements, and let's say each of my interceptors had the capability to move 2 hexes. So when I move this one in, I could not move to another hex if it was here, because this ship pins this ship. But on my second activation, this ship, since this one is pinning this one can freely, using its 2 hex drive capability, go here and then to this hex if it was here. Another rule is the galactic defense system pins all ships, so an infinite number of ships, as well as ancient dreadnoughts that would be in this center tile. They pin all ships. So again, the move action gives you different activations that you can use to move to or through adjacent hexes, and to be adjacent you have to have the wormholes or a warp portal on the hex. Now there is a technology later that gives you the ability to move only through a half wormhole. So let's say this hex was like that, and I wanted to move to this one. If I had the wormhole generator, I could go to this hex if I was the black player, because it's a half wormhole. But it would require that I had this technology, which affects all my ships. If on my turn I'm done taking actions, I can choose to pass. I would flip over my action card, and then I would indicate the order that I passed. So in this example, I passed first, so I'm going to be able to maintain first player for the next round. If this player passed first, and then maybe I passed second, you can see this player is going to be the start player for the next round, so you'd resort these. After you've passed, you still have the ability, when it gets back to your turn, to do a reaction. It's basically a limited version of upgrade, build, and move, and this allows you to react to other players possibly moving into your hexes and threatening you in some way. It still requires, though, that you take a disc off of your influence track and put it there. but those are all the main actions in Eclipse. Alright, so let's cover how combat works. So at the end of the action phase, we go into the combat phase, and we're going to resolve combat in descending hex order. So if there are combats in multiple areas, basically if ships occupy the same hex, or if another player's ship is in a controlled hex of another player, we're going to resolve combat. We'll resolve the higher numbered hexes first before we resolve the lower numbered hexes. Alright, so for this example though, let's just say we only had battle here. It's important to remember that battle is always a one-on-one battle. So if multiple parties are in the hex, basically whoever was in the hex first, or the defender, or the hex owner, they get to fight last. So obviously the galactic center was in there first, so they'll fight last. If you control a hex, you'll fight last if you had ships and multiple parties came in. So we, the black and the yellow player, have to battle it out first, and the winner can move on to fight the next round, basically whoever was in that hex first. The first thing we do is determine initiative order for each ship type. And so we'll look at the player board and we'll see yellow interceptors have a 3 initiative. They have 3 chevrons. The black interceptors also have 3 chevrons. So whenever there's a tie, whoever was there first breaks the tie. So let's say the yellow player was there first. So theirs are going to shoot first. They're first in initiative order. And then the black interceptors, and then let's check the black cruisers. They only have 1 initiative right there. So they're actually going to fire last. So the black cruisers are going to fire, or the black dreadnoughts, sorry, are going to fire last there. So we determine the initiative order for each ship type. If ships were tied of the same player, that player can decide which ship is going to fire first in the combat engagement round. Now when it gets to a ship's initiative round, they can choose to retreat instead of firing. Basically they'd have to face their ship to a controlled hex, and they get to leave on their next impulse. But they could be fired on or destroyed prior to that. So maybe yellow say, you know what, I'm going to retreat with my initiative impulse, and then if black gets a chance, they can still fire and do damage to that ship. Alright, so here are some general combat rules. All player ships of the same type fire at once. So all of the yellow player's interceptors would fire at once their initiative comes up. The number of dice equal the number of ships times the die symbols. So we'll see that I only have 1 yellow die here. So 3 interceptors each will roll 1 yellow die. If I had, let's say I had another ion cannon, each of my interceptors now roll 2 dice each. So on my roll, I'd be rolling 6 yellow dice when I get to the engagement round for my yellow ship. So it's the number of ships times the number of die symbols they have. A roll of a 1 is always a miss, regardless of the modifiers, and a roll of a 6 is always a hit. You are going to modify each dice based on the computers. Remember, the computers add pips, and shields take away pips from the opponent's die. Ships have a 1 base health, but remember that holes add additional health points. The asterisk, or the burst on the dice, actually indicates the number of damage done for the hit. And those damages get marked with the purple cubes, and those wind down the hit points. So you mark damage with the purple cubes, and then you remove destroyed ships immediately. So once a ship has exhausted all of its hit points, it gets removed. So it may not even get to its initiative turn to fire if it gets destroyed prior to even getting to it. Damage from a single die can only be applied to a single ship the attacker chooses. So let's say we roll something that does 4 damage, but the interceptor only has 1 hull point. That gets destroyed. you can't then assign that damage to other ships. All damage from a single die gets assigned to a single ship. And then the Ancients, when they're fighting, either there or here, and you can see they've got the same exact symbol. So this Ancient ship would roll 2 yellow dice. It has 2 initiative. It has 1 additional hull point, and it has a computer that modifies. When they choose to assign damage, they always try to destroy a ship first. Otherwise, they're just going to target the largest ship. And then the final general combat rule is that ships with missiles get to fire first, but the missiles only get fired once. So think of it as the missiles are getting deployed, and then they're exhausted, and then we'll go through multiple rounds, multiple engagement rounds in combat until only one side remains. So let's take an example of how this might work. So we've set the initiative order, and now we fire missiles. So we see if any ships have missiles. So yellow's first in initiative order, but they don't have any missiles. The black interceptor has a plasma missile. So each of their interceptors will fire 2 missiles. So that's 2 orange dice. So even though they're not first in initiative, they are first in initiative when it comes to missiles because they're the only ship with missiles. So they've got 1 interceptor, 2 dice symbols. So they'll roll these. A 1 and a 4. So a 1 we know is always a miss. They do not have any modifiers. If they had a +2, they could have turned that 4 into a 6 and done some damage. For this example, let's say this was a roll of a 6. So a 6 is always a hit. So this damage, or I'm sorry, that hit dice, now since there's 2 starbursts, will do 2 damage. We'll see that their interceptors do not have any additional hull points, so they only have 1 hull point. So the 2 damage will immediately destroy one of the ships. Remember, damage from a single die can only be applied to 1 ship. So even though I've got 2 damage, I can't split it up. So I can literally just destroy this 1 ship with the 1 hit. So that ship is now gone from the missiles round. Missiles only fire once, so that's the end of the missile phase. Once all missiles have fired, we now go into the engagement rounds with the cannons. So the yellow ships, or the yellow interceptors, get to fire first. We see each interceptor gets to roll 2 dice. So 2 ships times 2 dice means we get to roll 4 yellow dice. So let's say this was the roll. We can see we got 2 automatic hits. The yellow interceptors do not have any modifiers, so these have no effect, so they get to apply 2 hits. We know that the ion cannon only does 1 damage per hit. So they're going to look at the black player's interceptors and see that they only have the base 1 hit point. So they're going to apply 1 of the damage to blow up the interceptor, and that gets returned to the player. And they'll apply the other hit to the player's Dreadnought. But they can see that they've got the base hit plus 2 additional. So the Dreadnoughts have 3 hit points. So they'll just take that damage and apply it to one of the ships, knowing that it's taken 1 of the hits. So the black interceptors didn't even get a chance to roll their cannons because they got destroyed. So the next in initiative order are the black player's Dreadnoughts. So we see they have 2 Dreadnoughts, and each Dreadnought will be rolling a plasma cannon and an ion cannon. He's got enough energy to support all this tech, and we can see he's got 2 gluon computers. So he's going to modify all die results all the way up to 6. And the yellow interceptors do not have any shields. So everything that he rolls will hit unless it's a pure miss of a 1 roll. So each of his Dreadnoughts will roll a red and a yellow. And let's say this was the roll. So we know 1s are automatic misses regardless of the modifiers. But from his computers, he can modify this up to a 6 and this up to a 6 because of his 2 computers. So we know he's got a hit here and a hit here. The yellow will do 1 damage, and the orange hit will do 2 damage. The interceptors for the yellow player do not have any additional holes, so that'll basically destroy both of these ships. Now only 1 player remains, and now they will fight the galactic center. We'll see this galactic center doesn't have any initiative, so the black player, or the black dreadnoughts, will fire first in this phase, and we would complete this round until only one player remained, either the alien or the black player. Let's say in this example, the black player was successful. They were able to destroy the center. They get to claim that discovery token. At the end of combat resolution for a hex, all damage gets healed, so you can discard all purple cubes. And then at this point, they'd have the option of influencing this hex and placing a disc there. In fact, that'd be the only way they could get that discovery token. So they do that and they take the discovery token, and this combat round is resolved. It's important to realize that that one damage did not get healed until all combat was done. So damage that was inflicted during that first round with the yellow player carries over for any subsequent battles in the hex until all combat is finished. Here's another example. Remember, you're only allowed to influence the disc or influence the hex if all population have been destroyed. So let's say there was a battle here that the yellow player ended up winning over the black player, or maybe they just moved in and there were no black ships. They're not allowed to influence this hex until all population have been removed. So once combat on a hex has finished, you can attack the population. Basically, your remaining ships can attack once using their cannons, and each hit would destroy a population cube. So this one yellow interceptor would get to roll 2 yellow dice, and let's say they were both hits. They could remove 2 cubes. Let's say they had more firepower and they got 3 different hits. They could remove all of these cubes. Once the population's destroyed, then they could replace this disc with their own. These cubes get returned to what's called the graveyard. So based on the color that they came off of, we know they were 2 pink and 1 orange. They go here, and they don't get returned until after the end of the cleanup. That way you don't lose the revenue you're going to gain from these until these get returned, but we'll cover that in the upkeep phase. Another interesting technology are neutron bombs. If you have the neutron bombs technology, it means you do not have to fire your cannons to try to destroy cubes. Once you enter the hex and have resolved battle, if you're the last ship there and have neutron bombs, all the population cubes get removed. The final step of combat is to draw reputation tiles out of the bag, or the victory point tiles. And all parties will get to draw those if they participated in a battle. And you draw reputation tiles in hex entry order. So you'll remember in this battle, even though black won, yellow entered first and participated in the battle. So they'll get to draw their tile first. You get to draw 1 tile for just participating in the battle. You get to draw 1 for every interceptor you destroyed. You get to draw 1 for every starbase you destroyed. You get to draw 2 tiles for every cruiser you destroyed, whether it was a player or a dreadnought cruiser. You'll remember dreadnought cruisers occupy the ancient homeworlds, and these are always face up to start the game, so you know what type of cruiser you're battling. You'll get 3 victory point draws for any dreadnought you destroy, player or ancient. You'll remember you've got the option of putting some ancient dreadnoughts in the galactic center. You'll get 1 victory point draw for every basic alien ship you destroy. And then if you destroy the galactic center, you get 3 victory point draws. You remember the galactic center, and you can see the ancient dreadnoughts both give you 3 because they could occupy the center. Keep in mind the maximum chips you'll ever draw is 5. So even if you had a number that exceeded 5, 5 is the maximum, and you only get to keep 1. And that's as long as you have an open slot on your player board. So you may draw all 5 chips and decide, I'm going to discard this one, and I'm not going to keep the rest. Anything you discard or decide not to keep gets returned to the victory point bag. So there's incentive for participating in combat earlier in the game to get some of the higher value chips. And then also keep in mind that these reputation tiles get drawn for each hex that was resolved. So you may have multiple battles in a hex, but for each hex battle, you'll do one of these draws. And that's everything that goes into the combat phase. All right, once we finish combat, we can do the upkeep phase. You can use remaining colony ships. So for example, if this player had 2 remaining colony ships, they could flip both those over to send 2 cubes out. On this hex, they can send a pink and an orange cube out, and that will help them at the end to gain some additional revenue and production. So you can use any remaining colony ships. It would have to be on a hex where you have an influence disk with no enemy ships, so keep that in mind. The next thing you're going to do is get your upkeep and your income. So we're going to look at our player board, and the first thing we do is resolve the money first. So I'm generating 4, but this round I consumed 5 from my action discs, so I'm at a deficit of 1. So I would slide down 1 on the money track. If I'm ever in a situation of bankruptcy, I have a couple options. I could obviously convert my other resources, in this case 2 to 1, to get some additional money, or I can actually pull discs off of systems if I'm in a bankruptcy situation, and I may decide to pull that off, and that would now adjust 4 and 3. I would actually gain 1 if I was in a bankruptcy situation. So you can either exchange resources or pull discs off. As per the normal rules though, if I pull a disc off, all the cubes have to come back to the tracks. So there could be some chain reactions, so keep that in mind. After you've done your money upkeep, then you'll get production. So here I'd get 4 science and 3 materials. So I would just update my storage accordingly. After the upkeep is the cleanup phase. So we're going to do a couple different things. You get to return all your discs from your actions. We get to draw new tech tiles. So you're always going to draw new tech tiles based on the number of players. So let's say this was a 4-player game. We'd draw 7 new technology on the board. Just like in setup, any rare technology don't count towards that number. They just get their additional or bonus. All players will get to reset and bring back all their action discs to the track. So the cost of maintaining your empire will go up over time as influence discs stay out on controlled hexes. You're also going to get to unflip all of your colony ships for the next round. If there were any cubes in your graveyard from a battle, you now get to return those to your population tracks. So that's the benefit. So I was able to gain the revenue from these, and now the cubes go back at the end of the round. We're going to resolve any special hexes like ancient hives, supernovas, and pulsars. We're also going to reset the turn order. So based on where players passed, since he passed second, he'll move up there. And then we've got the new turn order. And we'll just slide these off for when players pass. All players will flip their action cards right side up. And we will advance the round marker. And we're ready to start a new round in the new turn order. At the end of the 9th round, the game ends and we score final victory points. So all players are going to earn victory points for each ambassador tile that they still had on their board. You're going to earn victory points for each of your reputation tiles. So at this point you can turn these over, and these are the ones you were able to retain. So you're going to add all those to your score. You're going to earn victory points for any retained discovery tiles. Remember, when you get these, if you choose to take this side, you have to discard it. If you choose the 2 victory points, you get to retain it. You'll get victory points for any development tiles that gave victory points, only if they show a victory point shield. If you defeated any ancient cruisers or dreadnoughts, those are worth a point each. You're going to get victory points for your progress on the technology track. So since I got 4 on this row, I'll get 1 point. If I was able to get another 3, I'd get the maximum of 5 for this row. So it's whatever is exposed once you get up to this point. Each controlled monolith on the board would score me 3 victory points for the player that controls the hex. And then additionally, all players are going to score points for each of their controlled hex based on the victory point of the hex. So this hex, for example, is 3. The galactic center is 4. That one's another 3 points, and you add those points together. The last player to have the traitor card, if any, would lose 2 victory points. And then don't forget to check your specific species boards for any species bonus that give you victory points at the end of the game. Most victory points is the winner. If there's a tie, it's the player with the total amount of resources in storage that would break the tie. And those are the core setup and rules for Eclipse.